the Manifesto on Food and Health, and it is the first time the English version is being released. So it is like a release of this manifesto internationally. It was originally done in Italy, so the first version came out in Italian. And the manifesto is, of course, on food for health, on cultivating biodiversity for cultivating health. Because we've got so used to thinking of ourselves as separate from nature. And that's what 200 years of the fossil fuel age gave us. But the 500 years of colonialism violently separated ecologically rooted communities that had sustained their place, their culture, their diversity for millennia. And I think that's a piece that's waiting to be recognized. Because those practices have to be our teachers of how to live. As Mary mentioned, I moved to look at the Green Revolution just during the program on peace and global transformation when Punjab erupted and a Nobel Peace Prize was given to the Green Revolution. But Punjab was at war. And I said, this doesn't seem to make sense. And I did the study for the United Nations program and realized, I looked at it as a scientist and realized everything that we've been told about the industrial agriculture system doesn't bear the test of scrutiny and experience and evidence. The separation of humans from nature has gone hand in hand with also a deep separation in the food systems now. So we have polarization in our societies economically, but we have polarization nutritionally. And every division and every polarization which is a result of unjust, non-sustainable action is being naturalized as if it's inevitable, as if it's existed forever. Recent constructs of racism, recent constructs of sexism, recent constructs of religious hate, and the recent construct of the idea that good food is a luxury, that only the rich can afford. Now, the Food for Health Manifesto was born of the fact that there was a separation in the way we look at issues of the health of the planet, which are usually called the environmental movement, and the issues of health of people, but seen more in the medical paradigm as drugs and pharmaceuticals, not in terms of healthy people. The manifesto has synthesized how the problem of the health of people and the problem of the health of the planet is one health. Because we are part of the earth, we are not separate. We are not only made of the 5 elements that the earth is made of, but every process that impacts the earth impacts us. I just read a quote by Rachel Carson who says, "Our heedless and destructive acts enter into the vast cycles of the earth and in time return to bring hazards to ourselves." Now, the disruption of the vast cycles of the earth have led to climate chaos and climate extremes. When you think of climate change, you think nicely, sweetly, the temperature will rise, and there are the climate skeptics and the climate deniers who say, oh, and vine will grow in Scandinavia, and we'll be able to swim in the sea in winter. But no, that's not what climate change is about. Climate change is about havoc and chaos. That's why in my book, Soil Not Oil, I've talked about climate chaos. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know you'll have fires in these mountains. You don't know the mudslides will come. There's no model that can predict it. The models can predict the temperature rise, but the particular disasters in particular places is a disruption of the Earth's vast cycles, which are the systems, ecological systems that maintain life. And while all indigenous cultures have recognized that the Earth is living, we call her Vasundhara, Bhumi, Landis, they call her Pachamama. Every indigenous culture have their own name for it, for her. But we went through these 200 years of a fossil thinking that declared nature as dead and mere raw material to be exploited. And then we've extracted and extracted and extracted. The idea of nature as dead allows us to kill a living earth and disrupt her cycles. So many of the diseases we are suffering from are being called metabolic diseases, where the ability to self-regulate by living systems collapses. And Gaia is a living system who has regulated her temperature in a way that over 200,000 short years in her 4 billion years of evolutionary life, her temperature and her life of diversity allowed our species to evolve. We are now on a verge of not just pushing other species to extinction. Every day 200 species are pushed to extinction. Hilal and I were just talking about how there's a recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is a panel, like there's an IPCC for climate, there is the IPBES for the Biodiversity Convention, and they've just warned that we are in the 6th mass extinction, that 1 million species are threatened. And as we've written in the summary of the manifesto, the signs are loud and clear from the earth, from diverse species, from insects, from science, from women, from children, from indigenous communities, from the increase in disease in our daily life. Life on this planet and our future is under severe threat of the 6th mass extinction, climate catastrophe. The extinction of species, disappearing diversity, and the destruction of the planet's climate systems are interconnected through fossil fuels and chemical poisons based on the rampant acquisitive competition and profit-based agricultural industrialization. Not only is the human disease epidemic linked to the instability of the planet's systems, every aspect of what's going wrong with the planet's health is interrelated. We usually think of climate change in a silo and reduce it to an issue of finding an energy substitute. But you can put 90% of your corn and soya to animal feed and biofuel, and you will have, through biofuel and its subsidies, an energy substitute, but you're going to have huge hunger. And not just hunger, destroy the Amazon. We were talking today, Jim was talking about how they're not recognizing that the Amazon is the richest ecosystem with the richest cultural diversity. It's now going to be an industrial agriculture zone managed by the Agriculture Ministry. It's just one large green desert of GMO soya sprayed with Roundup, as is the Midwest of this country. And sometimes you think, oh, California, organic. Yesterday, I was in Bakersfield, and first we went through these hideous oil rigs, miles of oil rigs. Then we went through miles of another green desert, the almonds. I don't think we should call this agriculture. Because it is not care for the land. Agriculture means care for the earth, care for the land. Food means that which nourishes us. When food starts to kill us and becomes the single biggest threat to life, it has become literally anti-food. Yeah? Because it's not nourishing us. Look at the figures of the chronic diseases. So neurodegenerative diseases, they're costing annually globally, and it's in the Manifesto, 2.4 trillion per year in US and UK. Autism, and the figures of autism are, I remember the last time I'd looked, it was 1 in 65, it increased to 1 in 35, and the graph climbs like this. And if that trajectory continues, 1 in 2 children in this country will be autistic because of the bombarding of our food systems with toxics. Cancer is 2.5 trillion. Diabetes, 2.5 trillion. Diabetes is so recognized as a metabolic disorder, but the body is not able to regulate its insulin production anymore. Endocrine disruption, about which the Manifesto speaks a lot because we have had the top endocrine disruption expert as part of the group, 549 billion. Infertility, every young woman I know is having fertility problems. They used to keep worrying there are going to be too many babies, yeah? And they used to call our wombs the population bomb in the Egypt population conference. The problem was uncontrollable fertility. The problem has become a decline in fertility, 3.6 billion. But think of the individuals who are suffering. We thought every bacteria is an enemy. Wipe it out with antibiotics. They are emerging resistant. Antibiotic resistance is costing us 1 trillion. And just 2 weeks ago, I think there was a case where the fungicides used in agriculture, which are killing the beneficial fungi, like the mycorrhizae in the soil, are now creating virulent funguses, which are not controllable. And a person died with one of these, and then they couldn't clean because it was all over the walls and the air conditioning ducts. Obesity, 1.2 trillion. Birth defects, 22 billion. We are talking about costs that are so much bigger than the so-called food and agriculture economy. And the food and agriculture economy is benefiting literally 3 corporations that control the chemicals and the poisons. I call them the poison cartel. Bayer has merged with Monsanto. Dow has merged with DuPont. Syngenta, which was already a merger of Ciba-Geigy, Sandoz, AstraZeneca, has merged with ChemChina, the big chemical giant China. They not only decide what agriculture will be done and what toxics will be sold, they decide how science will be done and what lies will be told. And that's why the cases of cancer and glyphosate that are happening on Roundup, that are happening in California, are so important. Just 2 cases dropped Bayer's market value by 68 billion. They had paid 66 billion to buy Monsanto, and now because they lied that glyphosate does not cause cancer, they're losing out. And all people who do risk management are saying it's not a question of when. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. They'll have to fold up. The devastation. Now there are about 8,000 new cases, because the WHO had said it's a carcinogen and they attacked the WHO. Scientists had said it's a carcinogen, they attacked the individual scientists. And one big reason we've done this manifesto is individual scientists who bring this evidence of harm are hounded by these corporations. So we said we need a solidarity of scientists to speak the truth, to bring the truth to the public. Start looking at the harm to the health of the planet from the industrial agriculture system. 50% now, it used to be 40%, but 50% of the greenhouse gases are coming from the way we produce food and consume it. 15% is from the actual production system, in which synthetic fertilizers are a very big contributor. And nitrous oxide is a very lethal greenhouse gas, 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide. Free-range cows don't emit methane. They don't stink like the CAFOs do. Methane is that stinky gas. It comes from food waste in waste dumps and factory farms. And there's a huge mistake being made extrapolating factory farm damage to all animals anywhere. And this is something we'll have to step back and reflect a little better on. Every time I speak, there's someone who will put up their hand and say, what do you think of animal agriculture? I said, what do you mean by animal agriculture? If you mean factory farms, they shouldn't exist because they are a big destruction and a big violence against animals. But if you mean by animal agriculture a place where animals are present, then you'll have to be part of Monsanto, who is dreaming of farming without farmers, because we too are animals. And if we are not on the farm, then Roundup is. Then giant combined harvesters are. Then tractorless drivers will be. And drones spraying poisons. Well, that's the image they have. They call it precision agriculture and digital agriculture. And dream of an agriculture with no animals, no people, no humans. And I keep saying that's not a food system. You cannot break the iron law of food. Food is not a commodity. Food is the very nourishment in the cycle of life. And it's this nourishment in the cycle of life that is being destroyed. And this nourishment takes place through life itself, through biodiversity. So in Navdanya, we have found that the more diversity there is, the more nutrition there is. We measure nutrition per acre and not yield per acre. We can feed 2 times India's population by protecting our seeds and growing diversity and intensifying biodiversity, not chemicals and toxics. Because when we say intensification, the assumption is intensification of chemicals. But we can get to 0 chemicals and intensify ecological processes, which actually produce more. That's the work that Hilal does for the UN. So we measure health per acre. It's assumed that the more commodity production there is, the farmers will do better. But if they did better, why are farmers disappearing? They are part of the species threatened with extinction. In my country, 300,000 farmers have committed suicide. It's the highest rate of suicides in this country too. And in Australia, and in England, and in France. It's just not talked about. Because the poison cartel is so powerful, this is the area which they will not allow discussion of. And I have said, and I'll say it again, the pushing species to extinction, our bees to extinction, our butterflies to extinction, our insects to extinction, pushing the soil organisms to extinction, which is desertification, is a crime against nature. And that's why we held a tribunal in The Hague on Monsanto, said they need to be tried for crimes against nature, which is ecocide, and crimes against humanity, which WHO defines as deliberate harm to a group. Deliberate harm to a group. A deliberate harm by an agriculture model that is designed to harm the farmers and not allow them to survive. An industrial model of agriculture that's designed with its toxics to destroy our health is genocide. 8 million people are dying every year because of cancer. 8 million. But they keep talking about the genetic basis of cancer when scientifically we know only 5% cases have their roots in the genetic base. All else are induced by toxics in the environment and stress. But toxics in the environment are the single biggest cause. The power of biodiversity is the power of life. And in our manifesto, we've talked about how the destruction of biodiversity is the destruction of both the planet's health and our health. We have a section on biodiversity of chemical-free food is vital for the healthy gut microbiome. All Navdanya's work, I think we were the movement that started to recognize that biodiversity is vital to a food system that nourishes. But over the years we've realized, and that's what we research, that's what we teach in this A to Z course, that biodiversity is the only way you can get rid of the chemicals. Because biodiversity controls pests, you don't need pesticides. Biodiversity prevents the emergence of pests. Biodiversity and cover crops prevent the emergence of weeds. Weeds and pests are symptoms of an imbalanced agriculture. And the more you attack with toxic lethal chemicals, Roundup for weeds, all the pesticides for the pests, you get more virulent weeds and you get more virulent pests. You can't win that war. Because evolution is always 10 steps ahead of this mentality of control. We know biodiversity out in the world is vital, and this recent report from the Biodiversity Convention is a warning. But only in the last decade, ancient systems of health and healing like Ayurveda, which means the science of life, 5,000 year old science. And it says, Annam sarva aushadhi, food is the ultimate medicine. It recognizes that diversity is the key to good health. That's why the Ayurvedic recommendation is you must eat 6 tastes. Because the balance of tastes means you have a balance of nutrition. But only in the last 10 years in modern science are they recognizing that the gut is a microbiome which contains trillions of bacteria. There are 100,000 more microbes in our gut than people on the planet. And just as when we apply urea to soil, the rich biodiversity of soil microorganisms that create the diversity of soil nutrients is destroyed, and the soil becomes diseased and desertified. In a similar way, when we eat poisons or too many antibiotics, our gut microbiome gets desertified. And that desertification is the root of all chronic disease. Scientists are now showing how you attack through poisons the bacteria that produce the enzymes, that produce the neurotransmitters, is the reason your neurological functions are decaying. That's how autism begins. And I know mothers who've shifted to organic and autistic symbols start to reverse. I also know doctors who realize the link between autism and diets. And I know them in this country, I know them in France, I know them in Italy. The poison cartel ensures they lose their licenses. Now, what's the poison cartel? They began with making poisons in Hitler's Germany to kill people. Its design was to kill. And I get surprised at how we've handed over food, which is supposed to give us life, to a cartel whose expertise is killing and death. So they got the expertise then, they've evolved the expertise further, but the expertise is still of killing. Every product they made. And on the one hand, Bayer, having bought Monsanto, sells the Roundup that gives you cancer, but Bayer also has monopoly patents on cancer drugs. So the 8 million cases of death, but the 13 million new cases of cancer every year are a new market. In physics we know there's nothing like a perpetual motion machine. But this money machine is a perpetual motion, ever-increasing machine. Every crisis becomes a new opportunity. So we know that the industrial farming has contributed to 50% climate change, 75% desertification, destruction of soils, biodiversity erosion. So what has Monsanto done in the last few years? Bought the world's biggest climate data corporation, bought the world's biggest soil data corporation. And in this catastrophe of not knowing when the next drought will come, next flood will come, they want farmers to be dependent on them for climate data and their soil data. They're putting spyware in these tractors to collect the data of the soil, send it to Monsanto headquarters, where it's processed through algorithms, turned into big data to be sold back to farmers. Agriculture is going to be the biggest place where artificial intelligence is employed if we give up our ecological intelligence. If we give up our co-creation, as Mary said, with nature. If we continue to treat food production as the lowest of activities. We've got to reverse this totally false hierarchy, just like the false hierarchy that men are superior to women. No, we are equal. And in this period of crisis, the women's expertise of caring could be a chance for a future. The decline of biodiversity of the planet, the decline in our gut, the decline in our diet. Science has recently begun associating this decline with the increase in inflammatory diseases, ranging from inflammatory bowel syndrome, to cardiovascular diseases, liver diseases, and many types of cancer. And I just, a few years ago, heard this issue of the leaky gut syndrome, The increasing in frequency of inflammatory diseases has been associated with a decrease in our immune defenses. And I don't have the time to give details of how particular, like the whole GMO crops, there was proven evidence that they're increasing the inflammatory diseases. But on the other hand, we have so much evidence now, and that's in the manifesto, that the richer the biodiversity in your field, the more the nutrition in your food. Not only because biodiversity increases nutrition, but biodiversity increases the nutrition in the soil. In industrial farming, our foods have lost 60% of their nutrition. In ecological farming, because we are increasing the nutrition in our soil, we are increasing the nutrition of our plants, and we are increasing the nutrition in our food. I'll just share with you some data from the Navdanya research, which is in the manifesto. So we did this research measuring 20 years of change in the Doon Valley, which is where I come from. And we had the top soil ecologists do the study for us, and the changes in chemical farming and in organic farming. In organic matter has increased 99%. It has gone down 14% in chemical. And why is this important? When you recycle organic matter, you're not just increasing soil fertility, you're not just giving food to the soil organisms who are then producing the nutrients that give food to your crops. You are actually pulling out the excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And through the plants, putting it in the soil, which is the only place to reverse climate change. Every other technology stops increasing emissions. Only living systems have the power to reverse this damage. Nitrogen, we assume nitrogen fertilizers increase nitrogen in the soil. It's gone down 22%, soil nitrogen, with chemical fertilizers. Without applying any nitrogen fertilizers, organic soils have 100% more. Because the soil organisms are producing your nitrogen, the earthworms produce your nitrogen. But they're not just producing these macronutrients, the micronutrients and trace elements. So a doctor from Australia told me once, when she came to the farm and she saw this data, because zinc has gone down 37% in chemical farms. It's gone up 14% on our farms. That decline of 37% contributes to what this public health specialist has recognized through a public health practice and the brain biochemistry that 50% teenagers in Australia are depressed, and when she did the study, she found deficiency of zinc. In England, they're finding attention deficit disorder for which the most lethal drugs are being given to our children. Magnesium can reverse that issue. It's deficiency of magnesium that leads to attention deficit. It's gone down 17% in the chemical soil, it's gone up 14%. So the health of the soils, the health of the plants, and our health is one continuum. The killing of the bees and butterflies, and the kit of killing in our gut microflora, and killing us with cancer is one continuum. They're not separate problems. And that's the reason that we are now launching a campaign, and I hope all of you will sign up for it. I think the Friends of Navdanya website is up? Not yet. You can, in a week or two, but the Friends of Navdanya website will be up, but you can go to the Navdanya International website, where the campaign for a poison-free, fossil fuel-free food and farming by 2030. We can begin in our garden, and you go to all the gardening space in Santa Barbara. We can expand to the county. We can expand to Southern California. 2030, we should make a commitment to the future of this planet and our future, because all the indicators, whether it's IPCC saying we have 12 years to change, or the Biodiversity Convention saying if we don't shift, we with other species will be extinct. 10 years window we have to regenerate the planet, regenerate our health, regenerate our democracy, regenerate our communities. And our poison-free pledge, we basically say protecting life on Earth makes ecological, local agriculture and organic farming an imperative. This transition is at the heart of the movement for poison-free food and farming. Our love for the Earth will not allow the closure of our future. We embrace humanity and celebrate our biological and cultural diversity. We will defend the rights of the Earth and the rights of all her citizens, as well as every child, because it's the children who are striking on Fridays to say we have a right to a future. The Fridays for the Future strike is children striking. By first making peace with the Earth, we can create peace among people. By recognizing the rights of Mother Earth, we are better able to defend the rights of people. Together with our creativity and the Earth's generosity, we will reduce our ecological footprint and expand our planetary consciousness of being one Earth family with one common home. The Earth is for all beings today and tomorrow. Together as diverse species and diverse cultures, and through poison-free food and farming, we offer climate solutions and rejuvenate biodiversity. We have the creative power to stop the sixth mass extinction and climate catastrophe. And I want to mention, we've got 6 times more pollinators on the Navdanya farm. Not because we created a pollinator sanctuary, we just saved seeds and protected biodiversity, and then biodiversity replenishes other biodiversity, because in the web of life, creativity is happening all the time. By joining hands, whoever we are, wherever we are, we must create ever-expanding, never-ascending oceanic circles of poison-free, fossil fuel-free Earth communities, celebrating our interconnected life and freedom. This is the call of Earth democracy, our highest duty as Earth citizens. Thank you.